May 31st, 1223. Kalka River, southern Rus. 80,000 Russ's warriors and 20,000 Cuman horsemen lie dead or dying along 12 miles of blood-soaked steppe. The survivors run. They abandon their armor, their weapons, their wounded brothers. Behind them, Mongol cavalry hunt stragglers like wolves culling a herd. Prince Mstislav the Bold, who commanded this army hours ago, watches from a hilltop as his world ends. 3 days earlier, he led the largest coalition army ever assembled in Russ's history. Now he's witnessing the complete annihilation of Eastern European military power in a single afternoon. The Mongols didn't just win this battle, they erased an entire generation of Russ's nobility, shattered 3 principalities, and opened the gates to Eastern Europe. And they did it with 1/4 the forces. The Russ's princes weren't caught by surprise. They weren't ambushed. They weren't outmaneuvered by terrain. They walked into this slaughter with their eyes wide open, ignoring every warning, every tactical advantage, every lesson their ancestors had learned about steppe warfare. They had position. They had defensive ground. And they threw it all away chasing an enemy that was designed to be chased. Before we dive in, pause for a second. Make a prediction. Was this battle winnable for the Rus? Or did the Mongols engineer a trap so perfect that 100,000 men were already dead the moment they decided to fight? Keep that answer in your head. By the end, you'll understand why this wasn't a battle. It was an execution. If you are into military history that dissects the psychology of annihilation, instead of just recounting battles, hit subscribe. Because what happened at Kalka River wasn't about superior numbers or better weapons. It was about predators who understood how to make their prey destroy themselves. To understand how 25,000 Mongols slaughtered 100,000 warriors in one day, you need to understand what was hunting across the steppe in 1223. The Mongol Reconnaissance Force. 2 years earlier, Genghis Khan had sent 20,000 cavalry under generals Jebe and Subutai to probe westward. Their orders were simple: cross Persia, circle the Caspian Sea, gather intelligence on the kingdoms beyond, and return. But Jebe and Subutai weren't scouts. They were apex predators with 2 decades of conquest behind them. They'd destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire. They'd shattered armies 10 times their size, and they'd perfected a system of warfare that turned traditional European tactics into suicide. The Mongol army wasn't built like anything the Russes had ever faced. No heavy infantry, no siege trains, no supply caravans slowing them down, just cavalry. Light horse archers who could ride 100 miles in a day, and heavy lancers who could smash through any formation. Every warrior carried 3 horses, rotating mounts to maintain killing speed for weeks. They could shoot accurately at full gallop. They could coordinate maneuvers across dozens of miles without modern communication. And they'd spent their entire lives learning one skill above all others: how to bait an enemy into breaking formation and then annihilate them in the open. By spring 1223, this Mongol force had carved through Georgia, devastated Azerbaijan, and was raiding north of the Caucasus Mountains. And that's when they encountered the Cumans. The Cumans were Turkic nomads who controlled the steppes north of the Black Sea. They'd fought the Russ's princes for generations, raiding, trading, sometimes allying. They knew steppe warfare. They understood cavalry tactics, and when they saw what the Mongols did to Georgian armies, they ran. Not because they were cowards, because they recognized something the Rus princes never would. You don't fight Mongols in the open steppe. You don't chase them. You don't meet them in battle. You survive. The Cuman Khan, Khotan, fled north to the Dnieper River. His daughter was married to Prince Mstislav of Galicia, one of the most powerful Rus's princes. Khotan brought a warning and a plea. These Mongols aren't raiders, they're exterminators. Today it's us, tomorrow it's you. Help us destroy them now or face them alone later. Mstislav listened, and he made the decision that would doom 100,000 men. He called for a coalition. Prince Mstislav of Kiev, the senior prince, joined. Prince Mstislav of Chernigov committed his forces. Prince Daniel of Volhynia, young and hungry for glory, pledged his army. Smaller princes brought their retinues. The Cumans added 20,000 horsemen. By May 1223, the largest army ever assembled by the Rus's principalities marched south toward the steppe. 80,000 Rus's warriors, 20,000 Cumans, heavy cavalry in lamellar armor, infantry with spears and axes, confidence that bordered on arrogance. They outnumbered the Mongols 4-1. They were marching to crush an exhausted reconnaissance force at the edge of its supply lines. The Mongols were waiting. Jebe and Subutai knew the coalition was coming weeks before the Rus princes left their capitals. Mongol scouts had mapped every ford, every hill, every water source between the Dnieper and the Kalka River. They knew the size of the Rus's army. They knew which princes commanded which contingents. They knew the Cumans would break easily, and they knew exactly how to turn the Rus's princes' aggression into a killing field. The trap was already set. The Russes just hadn't stepped into it yet. The coalition army crossed the Dnieper River in mid-May. Mstislav of Galicia commanded the vanguard. Mstislav of Kiev led the main force. The Cumans rode on the flanks. It was a ponderous march. 100,000 men moving south through contested territory, slowed by supply wagons and internal rivalries. The three Mstislavs couldn't agree on strategy. Mstislav of Galicia wanted aggressive pursuit. Mstislav of Kiev favored caution. Mstislav of Chernigov vacillated between both. They were unified by one thing only, certainty that numbers would win this fight. And then the Mongols appeared, not the main force. A reconnaissance screen, 1,000 riders on the horizon, watching, evaluating, vanishing when the Rus vanguard advanced. Mstislav of Galicia sent cavalry to chase them down. The Mongols fled. The Rus cavalry pursued. The Mongols stayed just out of reach, always visible, always retreating, drawing the pursuit further from the main army. Then they turned, fired a volley of arrows, and disappeared before the Russes could close. It happened again the next day, and the next. Light skirmishes. Mongol scouts probing the coalition's formations, testing response times, measuring how far individual princes would chase. The Rus's commanders thought they were winning. Look at them run. They're exhausted. They're avoiding battle. We just need to catch them. But Jebe and Subutai weren't retreating. They were conditioning the enemy, teaching the Rus's cavalry that Mongols always ran, training them to chase, building the muscle memory that would kill them. On May 31st, the coalition reached the Kalka River, a small tributary that fed into the Sea of Azov, defensible ground on the western bank, high hills offering observation, fresh water. Every tactical advantage favored waiting here, forcing the Mongols to attack across the river or withdraw. Mstislav of Kiev recognized this. He ordered the army to make camp, fortify positions, and let the enemy exhaust themselves. Mstislav of Galicia ignored him. He saw Mongol cavalry across the river, the same cavalry that had been fleeing for days. Now they were there, exposed, vulnerable. Finally, a chance to bring them to battle. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't coordinate with Kiev or Chernigov. He took his forces, the Cumans and Prince Daniel's contingent, and crossed the Kalka River at dawn. 50,000 warriors splashing through shallow water, reforming on the eastern bank, charging toward an enemy that once again began to retreat. The Mongols ran. The Russes pursued. The trap was sprung. What Mstislav of Galicia couldn't see from ground level was what Subutai could observe from the hills to the east. The entire Mongol army had been positioned in a crescent, invisible behind the ridgeline, waiting for the Ruses to do exactly what they'd been trained to do over the past 2 weeks: chase. The moment the coalition forces crossed the Kalka, committed to the eastern bank, and stretched their formations thin in pursuit, Subutai gave the signal. The Mongol wings emerged from behind the hills, not fleeing, attacking. 10,000 horse archers swept down from the north, another 10,000 from the south. They didn't charge into contact. They circled, firing at maximum range, moving too fast for the Russ's heavy cavalry to engage, pouring arrows into the coalition flanks at 200 yards. The light cavalry that had been retreating turned and fired directly into the Russ's vanguard. The Cumans, who recognized this tactic, who'd seen it annihilate Georgian armies, broke immediately. 20,000 Cuman horsemen fled back toward the river. Mstislav of Galicia tried to reform his lines. Too late. The Mongol heavy cavalry, 5,000 lancers in full armor, smashed into the disrupted Russ's center. Not a sustained melee, a penetrating strike designed to fracture cohesion. They broke through, wheeled, withdrew before the Russ's infantry could encircle them. The horse archers kept firing. Arrows from 3 directions. The Russ's heavy cavalry, weighed down by armor, couldn't catch the Mongol lights. The infantry, without cavalry support, became isolated targets. Prince Daniel of Volhynia took an arrow to the chest. He survived, barely, dragged from the field by his retainers. The Rus's vanguard wasn't retreating yet, but it wasn't advancing either. It was bleeding, trapped in the open steppe with enemy cavalry on every side and no defensive position to fall back to. And that's when Subutai deployed the real hammer. A third Mongol force had been hidden in a river valley 5 miles east. 5,000 fresh cavalry, held in reserve specifically for this moment. They emerged now, moving at full gallop, targeting the gap between Mstislav of Galicia's command and the forces still crossing the Kalka River. Their objective wasn't to kill the vanguard. It was to cut them off from reinforcement, to isolate 50,000 Russ's warriors on the wrong side of the river with no avenue of retreat. The Russ's center collapsed, not from casualties, from psychology. The warriors who'd been chasing fleeing Mongols for 2 weeks suddenly understood they were surrounded by an enemy that had never been fleeing at all. Mongol arrows kept coming. Every attempt to form a defensive position was flanked. Every charge was evaded. The Rus heavy cavalry, the backbone of their military power, discovered their armor was useless against enemies they couldn't catch, and their lances were meaningless against arrows fired from 200 yards. The slaughter began in earnest. Not a battle, a hunt. Mongol cavalry cut down fleeing warriors, pursued them for miles, killed them in groups and individually. The river became a killing ground. Russ's soldiers trying to cross back to the western bank were shot in the water or trampled by their own panicking comrades. Bodies piled along the banks. The water turned red. Mstislav of Galicia, who'd started this disaster with his reckless charge, managed to fight his way back across the Kalka. He'd lost half his forces. Prince Daniel was gravely wounded. The Cuman allies were gone, scattered across the steppe, never to return. In 6 hours of fighting, the most aggressive elements of the coalition army had been annihilated, but the Mongols were not finished. On the western bank of the Kalka River, Mstislav of Kiev still held his position with 40,000 warriors. He watched Galicia's army being destroyed, yet he did exactly what sound military doctrine demanded. He held his ground, preserved his defenses, and waited. Subutai did not attack the camp directly. He surrounded it. Mongol cavalry formed a wide ring beyond arrow range, sealing off every escape route and blocking the river crossings. No supplies could reach the camp. no messengers could leave. The Rus' soldiers had only river water and the food they had brought with them. The Mongols could wait. The Rus could not. For 3 days, Mstislav of Kiev held firm. His position was strong, and his men were still intact. But he could see bodies lining the riverbank. He could see smoke rising from burning supply wagons. He knew Galicia's forces were destroyed. With every passing hour, his strategic position worsened. The Mongols controlled the steppe. They controlled the water access. They could wait indefinitely while his army slowly weakened. On the 3rd day, Mongol envoys approached under a flag of truce. Their offer was simple: surrender, hand over your weapons, and no Rus's blood will be spilled. You will be ransomed, released, and sent home. The alternative was death by starvation or a final assault that would kill everyone. Mstislav faced an impossible decision. No relief was coming. Fighting meant certain death for 40,000 men. Trusting the Mongols was dangerous, but steppe warfare placed great weight on sworn promises. He accepted the terms. The Rus' nobles laid down their weapons and walked out of the fortified camp into Mongol custody. The Mongols kept their word. No Rus' blood was spilled, but what followed was not an execution. It was something worse. Subutai ordered a wooden platform to be built. The Rus' princes and nobles were bound and laid beneath it. Wooden planks and earth were piled on top, slowly crushing them as Mongol commanders held their victory feast above. There were no swords, no blood, only pressure, darkness, and suffocation. Mstislav of Kiev, Mstislav of Chernigov, and dozens of Rus' nobles died this way. Their deaths fulfilled the letter of the Mongol promise while delivering a terrifying message. Surrender offered no safety. Mercy was not part of Mongol warfare. Kalka River was a catastrophe. Of the 100,000 warriors who marched south, fewer than 10,000 returned. 6 princes were dead. An entire generation of military leadership had been erased. But the greatest loss was psychological. Rus' warfare, built on heavy cavalry charges and defensive strongholds, had been proven obsolete. The Mongols were outnumbered 4-1, 25,000 against 100,000. Yet they won because they did not fight with strength alone. They fought with deception, mobility, and patience. They made their enemies chase, stretched them apart, and destroyed them piece by piece. Kalka was not just a battle. It was a test. Jebe and Subutai had come to measure Rus' strength, discipline, and command thinking. They learned that the Rus were predictable, divided, and vulnerable to manipulation. With that knowledge, the Mongols withdrew east. 14 years later, in 1237, they returned. This time, it was not a reconnaissance force, but a full invasion under Batu Khan, with 150,000 warriors. Cities from Vladimir to Kiev were burned. Armies were annihilated. Eastern Europe fell under Mongol domination for the next 250 years. Could the Rus' have won at Kalka? Possibly. Defensive positions, high ground, and river barriers limited Mongol mobility, but those advantages were abandoned. The Rus commanders could not resist the pursuit. Subutai understood this. He knew European leaders valued glory over caution, so he gave them a retreat to chase and turned that instinct into a death sentence. The lesson of Kalka River is simple. Battles are decided before the first arrow is fired. The Mongols did not defeat the Rus because they were stronger. They won because they understood their enemy's thinking better than the enemy understood themselves. By the time the Rus realized they were no longer hunters, but prey, the trap had already closed.